We've got so much to get to on this week's edition of Ford News. The VP is looking for her VP. We've got all sorts of stuff going on in Trump land. But you know what? Joe Biden showed he can president. We'll get to that and a lot more after this here on Ford News. He is Johnathan Ford. You need to follow him on X at FordJohnathan5. You need to follow me at MiamiRadioBeast. I'm Brian London. By the way, you need to go follow our Instagram account and our TikTok account and our YouTube account. We'll put all the links in the description. You can go follow us everywhere. We're starting to pump out content like it's going out of style. Johnathan, there's a lot to get to. Obviously, we have everything going on with Kamala Harris and her VP pick, which should be upcoming, maybe out by the time people listen to this episode. We've got Trump land going off. He was in Atlanta for another crazy rally and so much more. But you know what? Joe Biden is still the 46th president of the United States of America, and he is still doing his job and doing it well. And we know that because a big deal was just made and 4 hostages have come home and are back in the United States of America because Joe Biden has not stopped working for the American people. And a matter of fact, Johnathan, he made that deal the same Sunday that he told us he was going to bow out of the race. And he had COVID at the same time. So you talk about a guy that's still able to govern, but we have to give him props for making sure that he got Paul Whelan, Evan Gershkovich, Alsu Kamasheva, and Vladimir Kara-Murza home to the United States.
Yeah. And what else it proves to me is when I first heard about this news and these citizens coming back to the U.S., one being a former military service member and the other one being a journalist, is that when President Biden basically said he felt his record deserved another 4 years because he knows how to president and he knows how to do his job. And this just showed once again that President Biden, with the administration behind him, is very effective in getting things done that help support Americans' diplomacy around the world and also at home domestically. So I congratulate President Biden. And I also think it was very selfless of himself to actually state that Vice President Kamala Harris was also a very huge role in getting these people returned back to where they belong, and that's here in the United States. And I can't imagine what those families felt when they got this news, except for what we've seen them in the White House and President Biden just being that empathetic president that we have that is down to earth and speaking to the citizens. It seemed like they were not only emotional, but they're enjoying their time with the president. And then also on the tarmac of them finally coming in, you could definitely see that the family had a lot of relief on their shoulders. And President Biden had a kind of little pep in his step to where when reporters started actually asking him questions, he kind of jogged over to them and started answering questions. So it was a good day, not only for President Biden, but for those families.
It was such a moving scene, seeing those hostages get off that plane at Andrews, seeing the president and the vice president there to greet them back home to the United States of America. I know, listen, there's going to be people that are going to, listen, we had to negotiate the release of literally an assassin, a Russian assassin got released and is now back in Russia. Listen, bad people, but it's important to get Americans home. It just really is, especially when they're really were taken for nonsense reasons. That the trials are shams, the sentences are ridiculous. The Russian judicial system is nothing like what you should have in a free country. So yeah, listen, and you have to appreciate the NATO partnership and the partners that we have and their willingness to cooperate, because there was people that got released heading back to Russia that our allies did not want to let go, but they made it happen. And I just think it was spectacular. And you know what? If the former president in Atlanta is thanking Vladimir Putin instead of Joe Biden, I think that tells you all you need to know about that guy.
Well, what else it shows is that President Biden was also right that we are stronger when our alliances work together. And President Biden, just like you said, kind of hit on where our some of our closest allies did not want to bend at the knee at all to get some of these U.S. citizens home, but in the end, they bent over backwards for our friendship with them and the friendship they have with President Biden to make sure that this works. And also regarding the assassin that they had to release, I personally, and I think that these families feel the same way, don't care who we had to release to get these citizens back home. We can deal with him later. But as of right now, the ultimate goal would have been those families that finally have some closure in their life and have a loved one back home, and nobody could speak for them uh, uh, or put themselves in their shoes on what those lives should be worth.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, and I don't want to get crazy here, but I've watched enough spy shows to know that if we really want to keep track of this assassin guy and know where he is at all times, we can do that through various ways and means. So I understand where you're coming from. I just think, um, I just saw a video of Joe Biden leaving Mass today and stopping off, making the whole caravan stop off and go get some flowers for his wife, right? Why? Because he's a good guy and he's a human and he loves his wife and he went and got flowers for her. But you saw that same kind of emotion when he took the flag pin off his lapel and gave it to Paul Whelan. That just,
Mhm.
I just listen. I know how upset you were when you know Joe Biden bowed out of the race, and I get that. No one, I don't think there's anyone out there, unless you're a lunatic, cultist, MAGA, conspiracy nut job. Half of which are on my Facebook feed. But I don't think anyone out there is going to tell you that Joe Biden is anything but the most decent human being. And the empathy that he shows, the feelings that he shows, I mean, that's what you want in an American president, isn't it? I mean, I feel like we were having a conversation off air, and I was telling Jonathan about the story about me meeting George W. Bush, which I'll save for another time. Um, but he's another guy. I disagreed with every ounce of his politics. But in meeting him and also in just following, he seemed like an actual, like, empathetic human being that, war crimes aside, would actually give a crap. If he accidentally hit you with the car, he'd probably stop and make sure you were okay. On the other hand, the former guy, who's again just wants to talk about whether Kamala Harris is black or Indian, he has not 1 ounce of empathy at all. And I don't think all Trump wanted. He wanted those hostages home on his watch so that he could get credit for it. I don't think he gave a rat's ass about those hostages, other than him getting credit for it. That was the sense I got.
And the sense I also got from President Biden is that it was more, even while holding the press conference or meeting the family or having these phone calls, he stepped back and it was more about those families than it was about himself. That he knew that that was much larger than the office of the presidency, and that moment that those families were sharing were much larger than he could ever state at that particular time. But I'd also like to just l- remind people of what politicians used to be like prior to Donald Trump. Lindsey Graham, who was John McCain's best friend. You can look up the video yourself, and I'm sure Brian knows where I'm leading with this, but Lindsey Graham got emotional talking about President Biden.
if you can't admire Joe Biden as a person, then it's probably you got a problem. You need to do some self-evaluation, because what's not to like? Here's what I can tell you, that life can change just like that. Don't take it for granted. Don't take relationships for granted. I called him after Bo died, and he basically said, well, Bo was my soul. We've talked for a long time. He came to my ceremony and said some of the most incredibly heartfelt things that anybody could ever say to me. And he's the nicest person I think I've ever met in politics.
Is that right?
He is as good a man as God ever created.
So emotional. He got choked up a couple times just talking about the decency of President Biden. And he said that God created no better man than President Biden. That was his exact words then. And that reigns true even today, even though the political parties are so out of reach from each other, one completely based on a complete different universe. That is where politics used to be. And that is when Joe Biden, by all accounts, was considered one of the only people that could reach across the aisle and get the Republicans to do exactly what he believed was right. But it also shows that he was empathetic enough to where when John McCain was dying of cancer, the first person that reached out to Meghan McCain, even though she is ridiculing him every single day on X, the first person that ever reached out to her was President Biden. The first person that ever reached out to any of these people was President Biden. He's always been one, and it's noted and reported on that the man would show empathy, give you his number, and say, if you ever needed him, come see me. And that is why I felt that he deserved 4 more years. I do understand that differently now, which is the current circumstances that are going on in the energetic in the Democratic Party. But I just wish that time could hold still just 4 more years for him, because I feel like even his first 4 years, he will be known as one, legislation wise, one of the greatest presidents of the United States. Also, his empathy towards people. I think that another 4 years, he could have done a lot of good for the American people and possibly brought us all back together. The way that Lindsey Graham explained who President Biden was prior to Donald Trump.
Yeah, 1000%. I couldn't say it any better myself. You've hit the nail on the head. All right, we're going to take a break. We got a lot more to get to. There's so much going on. Johnathan and I need to take a quick look around X to make sure we haven't missed any breaking stories. Remember, transparency is important. We record this Sunday night. It comes out Monday morning. So if anything breaks in between, we'll have you covered on Ford News on one of our various channels, whether it's on X at Ford News Podcast, on TikTok, on Instagram, on YouTube. We will have you covered. And make sure, without a doubt, you're following Johnathan at FordJohnathan5, because he just pumps out facts, truth, and news all day long. When I don't know when he sleeps, works, or talks to his family. I have no idea, because it's just posting news all day long. But we'll have a therapy session during the break. We'll be back right after this. You're listening and watching Ford News. We are back here on Ford News. He is Johnathan Ford. Follow him at FordJohnathan5. I am Brian London. Follow me at MiamiRadioBeast. Follow the Ford News podcast on all the social media, whether it be X, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. Go follow us. Go find our content, like it, share it, do all that fun stuff. Johnathan, we got to talk about the enthusiasm that is just following in behind Kamala Harris here. We've had a million Zoom calls. I was on the white dudes for Kamala's Zoom call, and then they got their account suspended. Then it was back. I know our double secret editor and producer Matt was on the Dads for Kamala Zoom call. I was also on the Jews for Kamala Zoom call. We've had the women for Kamala Zoom call. We've had the black women for Kamala Zoom call. The black men for Kamala Zoom call. Tomorrow we've got comedians for Kamala Zoom call. We now have Republicans for Kamala Zoom call. The enthusiasm is crazy. The donations are crazy. There is a bunch of enthusiasm for Kamala Harris out there.
Yeah, and it's not only just the enthusiasm, as well as that, and we'll go into that here in just a second. When I just bring up a small little point, is that Republicans are now starting to come out more vocal against Donald Trump. We have some former lieutenant governors, former representatives. There is a lot more in this election in 2024 than there was in 2020 that are basically telling them, cut the crap out, that this divisiveness, these insults and these attacks on not only Harris's race, but also on their families has to end. And they've come out so much that quite a few of them have endorsed VP Harris, and they've also formed a group, basically Republicans for Harris, to where some of them are going to actually campaign for VP Harris in the future. But now, just going back to her favorability on most polling has, over the past 2 weeks, has risen significantly to where I've looked back in recent history and I can't find anything like it to even compare it, to give it any type of statistic measure. But she's basically went from the lower 30s, 34% favorability. She quickly, within a week, jumped to 42% favorability, to 43% favorability. Now there's polls out there that basically shows that she's anywhere from 47% to 52% favorability. But the majority of polls now are showing that she has a net plus favorability versus unfavorability, which is something that in years past, in elections, when I looked, like even in President Obama, or even President Bush, one of the key indications that of electability was the favorability rating, to where it was too low. It usually sent warning signs to the opposite campaign. And right now we're seeing Donald Trump lose that original bump for the assassination attempt, but he was about 46%. He's dropped around 40% right now. So he's definitely, in his campaign, are definitely struggling right now, while Harris is definitely riding the enthusiasm bus all the way from Atlanta to wherever they're going next. But right now we have, according to Silver Bulletin, and that as the elections were right now, the electoral college probability going to Harris's favor is about 50.5%. Her popular vote probability is 65.9%, and this is significantly risen. So what this means is they believe, with taking average polling, they believe if the election was today, that VP Harris would win the electoral college of 270. And we're also seeing a lot of these states tighten up as far as battleground states. Like you have definitely Pennsylvania, who's tightened up. I believe the Fox poll today has it basically even 49-49 for Trump and Harris. You have Georgia, who's within 1%. But the very surprising poll that I've seen, and I've said this repeatedly, is that Florida is creeping up the old back door in this polling, to where they're now only 2% within the margin of error for VP Harris. So I would definitely think that as this election gets closer, we're going to see a lot more focus from the Harris campaign down there in Florida, with the enshrinement in the Constitution as far as women reproductive rights. But right now, Harris can go no wrong. The only couple things that will actually keep bumping these increases would be one, the VP pick. No matter who she picks with that, like it's almost like the 90 Bulls bench right now. It's like no matter who you put in, you're going to win. Um, or you could or you're going to look at the convention, which she will get another bump for that. With it appears the first night will be a salute to basically President Biden and all he's done for public service. And then it looks like we're going to have Barack Obama. There's going to be a lot of speakers there, so she's going to get a significant bump from there. But the one thing, Brian, we can put to rest is VP Harris, as of Friday, Zoom call is officially the Democratic presidential nominee 2024.
Yeah, that was good to see. And I know we'll talk about it in the Ford fact check, but the way the Democratic Party did this was the way it should have been done, and avoided some kind of floor fight. By the way, just so what you're saying basically is that John Paxson or Will Perdue could come in and, or maybe Bill Cartwright could come in and get the job done. Is that what you're hitting at?
Oh, there's Livingston. I mean, I'm a huge 90 Bulls fan. B.J. Armstrong, Craig Hodges, Horace Grant, Scottie Pippen, Michael Jordan. I mean, I could go on. Like, that's when I actually paid attention to NBA basketball, was during Michael Jordan's days, and that's why I usually reference them or Caitlin Clark. That's pretty much all I know about sports.
Yeah. Well, and that's good. Speaking of sports, I keep track of the odds, not only in sports, but also for the presidential election. Now, most of the major books have not updated their futures for the election in 2 or 3 days. So Trump is still a little bit ahead. But if you look at the streams, they're, unlike Ghostbusters, they're about to cross. Right, like the streams are about to cross. Actually, at the end of Ghostbusters, spoiler alert, they cross the streams. That's how they, defeat the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man. But so the streams are about to cross. Kamala's about to take the lead when it comes to the betting odds, and people will set that aside. Oh, the betting odds, the bettors. Trust me, those people, the real serious bettors, know what they're doing. They understand it. They do their research. They will win money based on those odds. So that's something to keep track of. But the enthusiasm is there. The favorability is there. We still have a long way to go, right? Stories can pop up. We've had this Doug Emhoff story talking about his alleged affair when he was with his first wife. I first heard about it on Instagram when some of my friends started sliding into my DMs. Oh, you're Mr. New, because it was for the first time that I posted our TikTok videos on my Instagram, and they're like, "Oh, you're Mr. News and Politics now. Why don't you talk about Doug Emhoff's alleged, kid that he has out of wedlock with the girl that he cheated with, and blah blah blah?" And I was like, what are you talking about? And of course, if I went down a rabbit hole of MAGA cultists, I found stories. Now, there was partially right. He did admit that he did have an affair that was part of the reason why his first marriage broke up. There is no love child. Now, I've seen reports out there that there was a pregnancy that got ended, but there's no child out there. There's no child support being paid under, some hush money situation. None of that's going on. And if you want to talk about cheating, I would like to point out the former first couple. I'm just going to throw that out there, Jonathan.
Yeah, and I went, when I first got the news, of course, the first thing I did was I texted you, of course. I'm like, hey, looks like, I think my words were, looks like Doug had an affair. And but you're right. Like, in normal circumstances, I think we would have a little bit different opinion on maybe the circumstance. For one, let's just clear up one thing, is that he did have an affair. They both admit that their relationship was struggling at that point. They have since forgiven each other and are very, very close friends. So they don't hold any type of grudge against one another. But I don't want to hear anything like, if a Democrat wants to come up to me and criticize Doug for it, I'm okay with that because they've criticized Donald Trump for having 3 different wives, 5 different kids from 3 baby mamas, has cheated on every single one of his wives, SA liability, 26 different cases of alleged or allegations of SA. Like, I don't want to go down that road. And another thing is Doug isn't running for president, and I would just like that to stay in their little family, and allow Doug and I'm sure Harris and all of them have already talked about this. And for people not to know that this didn't happen, I guess the reports are showing that President Biden was aware of this affair, and it was part of the vetting process for Harris as the VP. So this wasn't something new that the Democratic Party didn't know that wouldn't come out. They were well of that, and it's like he's human. It was 20 some odd years ago.
Yeah, and if we're just going to talk about spouses, because Doug Emhoff is not running for president, he's running to be, or his wife is running to be president, and he would possibly be the first gentleman. If you want to go look at first spouse situations, I'm not going to throw anything out there, but the last president's spouse may or may not have had some situations. That's all I'll say on that.
I'm just going to come out and say it. She did some soft porn. I'm just going to say it.
All right. Perfect. That is wonderful. I'm glad we got that on the table. You know what I did want to get to before we get to our favorite segment of the week in the Ford fact check, is Kamala Harris's ability to attract from different parts of this nation all sorts of different demographics has been kind of surprising to me a little bit. But as we talked about to start the segment, all the different Zoom calls that are happening, but I did not realize, Jonathan, that her likability would reach so many different places in the demographics that make up the United States of America. I don't know if it's surprising to you, but it's been kind of surprising to me because, unfortunately, when it comes to this country and politics, glass half empty, here's the half black, half Indian woman running for president. I was like, oh, this might be an issue attracting people, but that hasn't been the problem.
No, and it has been absolutely shocking, and also welcoming for me to watch, especially how aggravated and upset I was over just President Biden and what I felt that he was kind of pushed out. But in 20 some odd years, or 23 years, or 24 years, that I've watched politics and politicians, I have never seen somebody be able to unite a party so quickly. And I'm talking about the party as in the higher ranking of the party, the Nancy Pelosi's, the President Obama, the representatives all the way down to Texas, Jasmine Crockett, to all of them uniting around her so quickly. And then, not to mention that, is you had President Biden diehard supporters that quickly rallied around. You had supporters that necessarily were probably going to vote for Biden, but weren't enthusiastic about it, that rallied around Harris. You had people that weren't going to vote for Biden at all that are rallying around Harris. You have Republicans that are rallying around Harris. And the one part that I'm going to bring up again that was just extremely shocking to me is just the favorability and the polling and the donations was just mind blowing. Like, I'm on Act Blue the first couple days, just refreshing it and sending you a text that says 40 million, 60 million, 70 million, 80 million. And then also just the humble response from somebody like First Lady Dr. Jill Biden, who basically just said, I understand that there was a lot of you that was supported my husband and had his back no matter what. Now, what I want you to do is take that same energy that you had for my husband and show it to Harris. And I think the Democratic Party responded perfectly. Like, I am mind blown just by how well this went off without a single problem, basically.
So, by the way, just before we head to the third segment, I pulled up the Act Blue tracker, and the first week it was off the charts, right? $252.5 million, right? Last week, not so bad. 121, almost 122 million dollars. Oh, and by the way,
Crazy.
close to $10 million today. So,
And for people that don't know, if you go to Act Blue and look at this, prior to VP Harris's or President Biden, let me back up a little bit. President Biden endorsing Harris for the presidential nominee, it was like 2, 3, maybe $1 million a day, which is a lot of money. But then it jumps like 69, 68, and then it hovers as far as I have tracked it. And I stopped tracking it a few days ago, but it was basically like anywhere from $8 to $15 million a day. And I don't know if that's what you're still seeing, Brian, because like I said, I haven't looked at it in a few days, but like it was just mind-boggling how quick this stuff was going in. But it just shows within a 7-day span, Act Blue would typically probably be around, I mean, I don't know, $20 million. And we're still looking at, what'd you say, Brian? What was the total?
for the last week was 122 million. Just today was close to 10 million. It's just been nonstop. It's been nonstop. Yeah, I mean, a regular day before all this was $4 or $5 million. So it's at least double, if not triple, quadruple what it was. Before Joe Biden bowed out of the race and endorsed Kamala Harris. It's been unbelievable. All right, we're gonna take a break. On the other side,
FEC report. Hold on, the recent FEC report showed that Donald Trump released roughly $130 million.
yeah,
And she released that it was like 280 roughly $1 million, over double of what he'd campaigned,
yep,
something like that. So it just
correct.
shows that the enthusiasm is there. And it's not, again, I'm gonna tell you guys, like, this is not just a little bump or a moment. This is a movement, a grassroots, small donation grassroots movement that is happening for VP Harris, and I don't see it stopping.
No, I don't either. All right, we're going to take a break. On the other side, it's our favorite segment we do every week. It is the Ford Fact Check. It's coming your way right after this. You're watching and listening to the Ford News Podcast. Welcome back to Ford News. He is Johnathan Ford. Follow him on X at FordJohnathan5. I'm Brian London. Follow me at MiamiRadioBeast. Make sure you follow the show, Ford News Podcast, on all of your socials, whether it be on the X, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. We are everywhere you want us to be. And now it's time for our favorite segment of the week. It's time for the Ford Fact Check. Johnathan, what are we telling the people this week? What's the Ford Fact Check?
Well, here's the thing. I am getting, and I think a lot of people are getting a little frustrated with this right-wing talking point that Harris's quick path to the presidential nominee and the Democratic Party is some coup attempt that was masterminded by President Biden and by Harris and by Obama and Nancy Pelosi. But here's what the facts that remain that they're forgetting is that on a ticket, Brian, I'm just going to ask you a quick question here. On the ticket,
Yeah.
when you go to vote
Yeah.
for the presidential ticket, what two names would be on the ticket for you if you were voting for the Democratic ticket in 2020?
It would be Biden and Harris.
Okay. So in 2000, just recently, if you were voting in a primary on the Democratic ticket, whose two names would appear on that ticket?
Biden and Harris.
Okay. So here is one of the problems I have with this whole talk about a coup attempt is that when people in 2020, at the sum of 81 million votes, when they voted for President Biden, they also voted for Kamala Harris because they knew that if something happened to President Biden, that VP Harris would step in. In 2000, just recently in the primary, when they are electing or nominating President Biden as the Democratic presidential nominee, they are still under the impression that if something happens to President Biden, that VP Harris would step in and take over as president. That's the first thing that completely destroys their whole coup attempt. As far as that, here is another. Everyone says, well, why wasn't it an open primary? Why wasn't it an open convention? It was. And here's how it works. And once on that Sunday, 2 weeks ago, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, this Sunday, when Harris got the endorsement from President Biden, any Democrat at that point, and when President Biden announced that he wasn't going to run for re-election, any Democrat at that point could have called for the halt of all delegates. So even when she started making phone calls, even 2 days later, when she started racking up hundreds of delegates, at any point they could have came up and said, I would like to primary Harris for the Democratic presidential nominee and put a hold to the delegates. No one did that. Nobody spoke out and said that they would like to be the nominee. That went to Harris. We also have the simple fact is that all the delegates, and you can call it what you want, but she reached out. She communicated with them. She was transparent. They automatically told her that they're pledging their delegates. You get to a certain number, and then you're the nominee, right? And the last time I checked, just because it was well past the number, we're at roughly 4,000 delegates that she had earned that were pledged to her. So there was no coup attempt. And here's another thing. The Republican Party, why don't you worry about your own coup attempt in 2020 that your man personally tried to pull off by handing out fake or trying to proceed fake electors to the Senate?
Jonathan, let me read to you the Oxford Dictionary definition of the word coup. Okay? A sudden, violent, and unlawful seizure of power from a government. The word sudden, the word violent, and unlawful are all in there. What has happened on the Democratic side with the Democratic ticket for President of the United States was not violent, and it was not unlawful. It is not a coup. On the other hand, on January 6th, was it violent? Yes, it was.
Yep.
Was it unlawful? Yes, it was. Go deal with your own problems in your own party, please.
Yeah, and just to show that it's unlawful or not unlawful, a simple fact is that the court systems are already ruled that the DNC and the RNC is basically a private identity or a private company, and they can pretty much put in whoever they want as the primary or the presidential nominee, but we have a thing called democracy, and you have a primary. But that's a good point about the whole coup is that it has to be violent, and there was no violence. In fact, it was a complete opposite of violence. It was enthusiasm, uplifting, supportive. It was completely opposite of a coup.
Each party has their own rules for the nomination process, okay? The Democratic Party's nomination process is different than the Republican Party's nomination process. That seems to be a them problem, not an us problem. I just thought I would bring that up. The Democrats have followed their own rules.
Yeah, and let's not also forget that none of these people on the Republican side was basically coming out in a big outburst of crying when the RNC blocked everyone from trying to primary Donald Trump in 2020 because they felt it would weaken their candidate. So they just didn't allow it. So, and was that a coup? No, because they're allowed to run, like you'd stated, they have certain rules within their convention or their party. And whatever that rule is, that's what they're allowed to go by.
Yeah, listen, in the Democratic side of things, delegates are only pledged, and that basically means, that yes, we're saying this, but we're not bonded to a nominee. That's not the way things work on the Democratic side of things. The Republican Party has just a different set of rules. It's not a coup. I don't even just enough with their BS already. They should have more important things to worry about, but evidently they don't. Johnathan, we will keep everyone up to date. They need to follow us, both of us, on social media. You at FordJohnathan5, me at MiamiRadioBeast. They need to follow the show at Ford News Podcast. Wherever you get your social media, whether it's X, TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, we will be all over the place. And who knows what we have coming down the pike. We've got some crazy ideas that we've thrown around that I'm not going to talk about on here, but you never know where you might find us soon. Anyways, we're going to get out of here, and we appreciate everyone who has watched and listened to
Absolutely.
Not only this show, but every show that we've done. Johnathan, always a pleasure, my friend, and we will see everyone next time here on Ford News.